On a quiet night, in a small southern town, a corrupt cop tied a black woman to train tracks, thinking no one would ever believe her story. Little did he know, she was an undercover FBI agent, and what she did next would not only expose him, but also bring an entire department to its knees. How will justice prevail in this shocking tale of courage and accountability? Stick around to find out, and don't forget to like, share, and tell us where you're tuning in from. So, Dunwood was a picturesque town, nestled in the rolling hills of the Deep South. Its cobblestone streets and antebellum architecture told stories of a bygone era. But beneath its serene exterior lay unspoken tensions. The town thrived on tradition, its residents clinging to the past while trying to navigate an evolving world. Despite its charm, Dunwood was a place where boundaries were often drawn, not by fences, but by prejudice. Jack Pruitt was a product of this environment. A burly officer in his early 40s, Jack wore his badge as a symbol of authority, one he wielded to uphold what he considered order. He was a man of routines, deeply entrenched in the small-town mindset that outsiders, especially those who looked different, were unwelcome. To Jack, the badge wasn't just a job, it was a justification for control. Zoe Carter, on the other hand, was everything Jack wasn't. A black woman in her early 30s, Zoe carried herself with quiet confidence. Her assignment to Dunwood wasn't by chance. She was there to investigate allegations of systemic corruption within the sheriff's department. Zoe's presence didn't go unnoticed. Whispers spread quickly about the new woman in town. To most, she was just another stranger. But to a select few, her very existence was a disruption. One evening at the local diner, Zoe overheard two men at the counter discussing her. "You seen that woman?" one muttered. "Yeah," the other replied. "She's not from here. Probably just passing through." "She better be," the first said, lowering his voice. "People around here don't like strangers who don't know their place." Zoe smiled to herself, quietly sipping her coffee. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to dismantle a system. It was a quiet Thursday night in Dunwood, the kind of evening where the town's main street felt almost deserted. Zoe Carter had just finished reviewing notes at the local library and was driving back to her rented apartment. Her dark sedan blended into the shadows, but to Officer Jack Pruitt, it stood out like a sore thumb. Jack leaned back in his patrol car, watching the vehicle pass. He didn't recognize it. In Dunwood, unfamiliar cars were enough to warrant suspicion. He turned on his headlights and slowly tailed the vehicle, his mind running through scenarios. "She's probably lost," he muttered to himself, though his hand was already reaching for the dashboard to activate his lights. Zoe noticed the flash of blue and red in her rearview mirror. A pit formed in her stomach, though her face remained calm. She pulled to the side of the road, keeping her hands firmly on the steering wheel. Jack's heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel as he approached the driver's side window. "Evening, officer," Zoe said calmly, her voice steady. "License and registration," Jack barked, ignoring her greeting. He tilted his head, scrutinizing her. "What are you doing out here this late?" "Driving home," Zoe replied, maintaining eye contact. "Is there a reason you stopped me?" Jack's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the way she held herself, calm, poised, confident. It felt like a challenge. "You're a little far from home, aren't you?" he said, glancing at her license. "This isn't exactly your kind of neighborhood." Zoe's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but she kept her tone measured. "I wasn't aware certain neighborhoods were off limits." Jack's expression hardened. "Step out of the car," he said abruptly. Zoe hesitated, her instincts flaring. "Officer, may I ask why? I've complied with everything you've asked so far." "You questioning me now?" Jack snapped, his voice rising. I said, step out of the car. Zoe took a steadying breath. I'm happy to comply, she said evenly, but I'll be recording this interaction for my safety. Jack's jaw clenched. You don't need to record anything. Get out, now. Zoe slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, her phone visible in her hand. Jack grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but unnecessarily rough. Put that away, he growled. Recording interactions with law enforcement is my right, Zoe said, her voice unshaken. Jack leaned closer, his tone dripping with menace. Your rights mean nothing out here. You want to test me? Let's see how far that gets you. For a moment, the two locked eyes, the tension between them almost tangible. Jack's grip tightened as he gestured toward the patrol car. You're coming with me. Zoe's mind raced as he led her away from her car. This wasn't a routine stop. This was something else entirely. As they walked toward the nearby train tracks, she glanced at his face, seeing not just arrogance, but something darker. She remained silent, her thoughts a mix of calculation and anticipation. She knew she had to keep her composure, because this was far from over. The air grew colder as Jack Pruitt led Zoe Carter away from her car, his hand gripping her arm tightly. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet echoed in the still night, broken only by the distant hum of a train. Zoe's heart raced, but her face betrayed none of her inner turmoil. She had been in tense situations before, and she knew composure was her most valuable asset. Where are we going, Officer Pruitt? She asked, her voice calm but firm. You'll see, Jack muttered, his eyes fixed straight ahead. There was a twisted satisfaction in his voice, as though he relished the power he held in that moment. As they reached the train tracks behind a deserted industrial yard, Zoe's unease deepened. The moonlight cast long shadows on the rusted rails, and the faint vibration of an approaching train began to ripple through the ground. This isn't procedure, Zoe said, stopping abruptly. You're crossing a line. Jack spun around to face her, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. You think you're smart, don't you? Walking into my town, acting like you belong here. I wasn't aware following the law required your approval, Zoe replied evenly. Jack's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered. He pulled a length of rope from his belt, letting it dangle ominously in the air. Let's see how smart you are now. Zoe inhaled sharply, but didn't move, as he pushed her down near the tracks. The cold steel of the rails pressed against her legs as Jack began tying her wrists together. She locked her eyes on him, her expression steady despite the fear building inside her. You think this makes you powerful? Zoe asked, her voice cutting through the night. This isn't power, it's desperation. Shut up, Jack barked, pulling the knot tighter. You don't get to talk back to me. Not here. The train's horn blared faintly in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Jack stood back, admiring his work with a smug grin. You know, no one's going to believe you. A black woman claiming a cop did this. Please. Zoe tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a faint smile. It wasn't a smile of defeat, but one of quiet defiance. You really have no idea who I am, do you? Jack hesitated, his confidence wavering. What the hell are you smiling at? Zoe leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. I'm the person who's going to end this little game of yours. Jack's smirk faded, as doubt began to creep into his expression. The train's horn blared again, louder now, and the ground beneath them shook violently. He stepped back instinctively, the light from the train casting his shadow across the tracks. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Zoe said, her tone calm but commanding, and I promise you'll regret it. Jack hesitated, his bravado crumbling under the weight of her words and the blinding light of the oncoming train. For the first time, he looked unsure, and in that fleeting moment, the balance of power shifted entirely. The train's horn blared, echoing through the empty industrial yard as the vibrations beneath the tracks grew stronger. Jack Pruitt stood frozen a few feet away from Zoe Carter, his arms crossed defiantly. Though the flicker of doubt in his eyes betrayed his confidence, Zoe, bound by rough rope near the rails, met his gaze with an unnerving calm. "Untie me, Officer Pruitt," Zoe said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Before you do something you can't undo." Jack smirked, though the gesture lacked its earlier bravado. "You think you're in a position to make demands," he sneered. "You don't get it, do you? People like me run this town." Zoe's lips curled into a faint smile. "And what happens when the world sees what people like you do to keep it that way?" The words hit like a sledgehammer. Jack's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, crouching near her. "You think anyone's going to believe you? A black woman claiming a cop tied her to train tracks? They'll laugh you out of the courtrooms." "No." Zoe tilted her head, her expression calm, almost amused. "You're right. If it were just my word against yours, they might. But it's not." Jack's brow furrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" Zoe nodded toward her jacket, still within arm's reach. "Take a look. Front pocket." Hesitant, Jack reached for the pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device, a recording device. His face paled as he turned it over in his hands. "What the—" "It's all there, Jack," Zoe said, her voice steady. "Every word, every threat, everything you've done tonight." The train's light now cast them in stark relief, its horn deafening as it barreled closer. Jack's hands trembled as he glanced between the device and Zoe, the reality of his actions dawning on him. You set me up," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. "No, Jack," Zoe replied, her tone sharper now. "You set yourself up. I just gave you the rope." Panic flickered across Jack's face as he fumbled with the knot, his hands shaking. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, but the words rang hollow. "It is for you," Zoe shot back, as the train roared past, missing them by inches. The moment it passed, Jack staggered back, pale and trembling. Zoe stood, brushing herself off as she locked eyes with him. "You'll answer for this," she said, her voice calm yet resolute. For the first time, Jack Pruitt looked powerless. The next morning, Dunwood was abuzz with whispers and outrage. Word of Officer Jack Pruitt's shocking actions had spread like wildfire after federal agents descended on the sheriff's department. Zoe Carter's evidence, complete with audio and video recordings of the previous night's events, left no room for doubt. Jack had crossed every line imaginable, and now the town was forced to reckon with its own complicity. At the precinct, Zoe and a team of federal agents began cataloging the evidence. A tense silence hung over the department as officers avoided eye contact, their loyalty shaken. Jack sat in an interrogation room, his head bowed, the defiance from the previous night replaced with a hollow resignation. The door opened and Zoe entered, flanked by Deputy Director Alan Reeves. Jack looked up, his face pale. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he blurted, his voice cracking. It got out of hand." Zoe raised an eyebrow, placing a thick folder of evidence on the table. "Got out of hand?" she echoed, her tone sharp. "You tied me to train tracks, Jack. At what point did you think this was in hand?" Reeves crossed his arms, his voice low and commanding. "Save your excuses. The recordings speak for themselves. What we need from you now is the truth. All of it." Jack hesitated, his gaze darting between them. I just, I thought I was doing my job, he said weakly, keeping the peace. By abusing your power, Zoe countered, her voice rising. By targeting people who look like me? You weren't keeping the peace, Jack. You were feeding your own need for control. Jack leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. What happens now? He asked, his tone almost pleading. Zoe leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. What happens now is accountability. You'll face the consequences, not just for what you did to me, but for every person you've hurt. And trust me, Jack, this town won't look the other way anymore. Reeves added, You can cooperate with this investigation, or we'll bury you with the evidence we already have. The choice is yours. Jack's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I'll cooperate, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'll tell you everything. Zoe stood, her expression unreadable. Good. But remember, Jack, cooperating doesn't erase what you've done. It's only the beginning of justice. As the door closed behind her, Jack sat alone, realizing the full gravity of his downfall. Outside, Dunwood began its slow journey toward reckoning and reform, with Zoe Carter leading the charge for change. Months had passed since the night at the train tracks, and Dunwood was no longer the same. Jack Pruitt's actions had sparked outrage, but they also ignited a long overdue reckoning. Federal agents had uncovered widespread corruption within the sheriff's department, leading to multiple arrests and sweeping reforms. The scars of years of abuse were still fresh, but the town was beginning to heal. Zoe Carter, now on assignment elsewhere, reflected on the changes as she packed her things on her last day in Dunwood. The letters and emails she received from community members were a testament to the progress being made. Among them was a letter from a community leader, Mrs. Carter, who had fought tirelessly for justice even before Zoe's arrival. We still have a long road ahead, but for the first time, people feel heard. Thank you for giving us that. Meanwhile, Jack Pruitt, stripped of his badge and title, worked to rebuild his life. His cooperation with investigators had helped dismantle the corrupt system he once defended, but it didn't shield him from accountability. His sentence included community service, and every hour spent cleaning graffiti or repairing buildings was a stark reminder of the people he had wronged. One afternoon, while painting the walls of a local community center, he was approached by a young man whose brother had been one of Jack's victims. You think a few hours of painting makes up for everything you've done? The man asked, his tone sharp. Jack paused, meeting his gaze. No, he said quietly, but it's a start. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right. The man studied him for a moment before walking away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. Dunwood's journey toward justice was far from over, but the cracks in its foundation had finally begun to mend. This story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of accountability and the courage needed to confront injustice. Jack Pruitt's downfall and Zoe Carter's unwavering pursuit of justice highlight that no system, regardless of how entrenched it may seem, is beyond reform. It takes individuals willing to speak out, act with integrity, and demand better to initiate meaningful change. In our own lives, this means recognizing when power is being abused, whether in our communities, workplaces, or institutions. The first step is to educate ourselves about our rights and the systems around us. Standing against injustice requires vigilance, courage, and often collaboration with others who share the same commitment to fairness and equity. The story also teaches us about redemption. While Jack's actions are inexcusable, his eventual cooperation shows that taking responsibility is the first step toward rebuilding trust. Similarly, we should hold ourselves and others accountable, but remain open to change when genuine efforts are made. Finally, Zoe's calm determination reminds us that progress often begins with resilience, even in the face of fear or doubt. Staying true to our values can inspire others and lead to lasting impact. Change may be slow, but with persistence, it is possible.